Hello everyone, I'm having a little bit of bother. I'm having a little bit of bother with the camera, so I'm just going to hold it. I've had my gimbal charging all day, but apparently it's not going to let me rotate my phone to the side, so we're just going to have it in my hand. I hope that's alright with everyone. Hiya Dot. Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be just talking to you about the Hartley Pit Disaster, the Hester Pit Memorial. The memorial is in St Albans Churchyard, Earsdon Churchyard. So yeah, I'm just going to be talking about the history of this. It also has Commonwealth War graves, so it's just a really lovely place for anybody to come and have a look at. But there's a lot of history behind here, and it's really quite a sad history as well. If anybody wanted to know, I was actually christened at that church right there. So christened right there. So this is how close to home it is for me. I've got my brother with me now. I'm just going to pass him the gimbal that didn't let me use it. Happy days. Day of charging that for nothing. But yeah, so here we are at St Albans. And St Albans was the place where the Hartley Pit Disaster, all of the victims of the Hartley Pit Disaster were buried at St Albans. I have been on talking about the Hartley Pit Disaster before, and there is a live stream investigating different areas as well. You might recognise this sort of hill up from the old pictures. There are some old pictures and I will locate them and post them in the group after. If you're not part of our Paranormal Newcastle group, I would really recommend you joining the Paranormal Newcastle group. But this hill upwards, it's on all of the pictures of the burials of all of the Hartley Pit Disaster, all of the men who died in this pit disaster. 204 men died in the pit disaster. It happened on the 16th of January 1862. 204 men and children died, and it actually resulted in the law changing. Previous to the Hartley Pit Disaster, you were allowed at the pit only one shaft, but after this disaster you had to have two shafts as a means of escape. Prior to this you could only have one means of escape, and that was allowed. But earliest records of the Hartley Pit Disaster, the earliest records of the Hartley Pit date back to 1291. The old pit was actually abandoned in 1844. It was mainly due to flooding. Essentially, the pit used to be right next to the sea. New Hartley is by the sea, and Old Hartley Pit was by the sea, and the seawater, because of the shaft, actually flooded through, so the seams were worked out under the sea. It used to flood, so they built the new pit just a mile inland the following year. They sunk a new pit shaft, and this was called the Hester Pit shaft. There was only one, and that went 12 feet deep, that pit shaft. Children had to be over 10 to work down the pit, so you had to be over 10 years old to work down that pit. The village of New Hartley was built around the mine, and men had good working conditions. For a pit at the time, it was really good working conditions down that pit. Not down the pit in general, but like you would go home and have a hot meal served to you. That wasn't the case with a lot of pits around the area, but it was the case with this one. There was only one shaft, and this costed £3,600 in those days. Coal, men and materials would travel up and down this shaft. The shaft provided fresh air and ventilation. There wasn't anything sort of ventilating through two shafts because it was all ventilated with that shaft. In 1843, the South Shields Committee, after the Hilda Pit explosion, concluded that more shafts were needed in the mines. So the Hilda Pit Disaster, that was sort of an explosion in South Shields. There was a committee after that to work out what went wrong. And they said that we need more shafts in our mines. So all of our mines, we need more shafts. Even George Stephenson, so if anybody knows the famous George Stephenson backed the approach to have 2 shafts in the mines. Ventilation was very important, and it was something that our mines locally lacked. The sinking of 2 8.5 feet shafts instead of 1 12-foot shaft would have actually only costed £900 extra. So instead of that £3,600, it would have only been £900, and that would have saved 204 lives. A pumping engine was still needed to pump the water out of the mine. Due to the proximity to the sea, a pumping engine was needed. I'm just going to walk around here. I think it's up here, but bear with me. I'm not too familiar, but I think it's up here. The disaster itself, the back shift were just taking over from the fore shift at 10:30 a.m. As the first 8 ascended out of the pit, the beam from the pumping engine, which was the thing that would pump all of the water out, snapped and it fell down and it blocked the shaft. 4 of the men in the cage coming up and ascending out, and they were swapping shifts at the time, so 4 of those men come out and they died. They fell down to their deaths. The other 4 clung on. So the other 4 clung on, and 3 of them survived. Only 3, unfortunately. The beam itself from the pumping engine blocked the shaft for 30 yards deep. Whilst being rescued from the cage, George Sharp Sr. fell out of the sling that he was in, and he fell to his death after being jammed on timbers. So unfortunately he didn't make it. 2 more of the men were rescued from the cage. Thomas Watson, he was a local preacher, and he descended from the cage to comfort and pray with the rest of the men until they died, and he was the last man out of the pit alive. So out of all of the men who were in the pit that time, he was the last out alive. Rescue efforts were slow, and the releases of noxious gas hindered the efforts. During the rescue efforts, men became overcome with the gas. Some reported men embracing sons, so the men were actually lying there embracing their fallen sons. So it's really hard to say, but they tried to come down, and they came down to try and rescue them, and there was poisonous gas stopping them from coming down. So instead of coming down and being able to help them, all they could do is come down and see the dead bodies of all of the men who were lying there. Men clutching their sons, brothers clutching their brothers. So unfortunately, there was also a horse that died as well. Now, there were horses down the mines, but this horse was carrying grain, and men were actually found with this corn in their pockets. They must have been trying to sort of feed themselves when they were down there, and they were found with it in their pockets. Bodies had been down the pit for 7 days before they were recovered. They were reported to be swollen and decomposing. When they were brought out, and this is 7 days down a really hot, no air ventilation mine, they were sprinkled with chloride of lime and sent home in a coffin to be identified. If they weren't identified, they were sent to the Methodist chapel, and this was for later identification. If you've seen any previous live streams, we have actually covered where the bodies would have been stored, one of the places the bodies would have been stored, but it's really sad. That pub does report activity. I'm not going to go into any paranormal activity on this stream. I am just going to sort of go into the disaster itself and the people who died in the disaster, because they need remembering, and it's just a really sad event, a local event that sticks with everyone locally to this day. So this is the place where they were all buried. everyone who died in this, nearly everyone who died in this disaster, all 204, and even some who died in Eccles Pit as well, by the way. I've mentioned Eccles Pit numerous times on this page. A lot of people who died there are buried here. On the Sunday morning, after they were all in their, on the Sunday morning after the funeral procession began, blinds were all drawn, and this is a quote, "Blinds were drawn in every home, but coffins lay in all of them." On the Sunday morning, carts arrived at the cottages to take the bodies in a procession to Earsdon Church, St Albans, which is here where we are now. More land was actually given to the graveyard by the Duke of Northumberland to fit the bodies, and 50 men from Seaton Delville Colliery were hired to dig the graves. There were only 55 workmen left alive at Hartley Colliery out of 204 people that died. 55 people left. That is a whole village. That whole village was made around the pit. Hester Pit never reopened after this disaster. And what you see in front of us is every single name of everyone that died. Now, you had to be over 10 years old to work down the mine. So, and I'm sure there is one boy of age 9, but you had to be over 10 years old to work in the mine. How many boys aged 11 years old? I mean, it is just horrible. Queen Victoria sent a telegram to offer her condolences. And I don't know whether you know, but Queen Victoria and Prince Albert died 1 month before this disaster. Queen Victoria went off the radar for a long time after Albert died. She was heartbroken, but she still found a month later the time to send a telegram over about the Hartley Pit disaster. So, I mean, aged 43, aged 14, aged 44, aged 15, it's absolutely heartbreaking. You've got families, and these families, these men, these boys, were all found dead at the bottom, hugging each other, embracing each other, knowing that they were going to die. They knew they weren't getting out. You've got J. Armour, R. Armour, J. Turnant, W. Pape, T. Sharp, H. Sharp, A. Elliott. And all of these will be the same families. They're all so young. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And I'm going to try and walk around this area, and I do apologise, it is quite uneven, so I'm going to try and walk around this area to show you the names on this side as well. Jack, can you hold this for me? Thank you. I'm going to try and avoid the nettles as much as I can. But here's some more. So I've shown you before the Hester Pit Memorial and all of the names on the floor in the memorial garden. Here you have the obelisk, and this is in Earsdon churchyard, and it's just somewhere I think you should visit. It's really heartbreaking, but it makes you respect what is important in life. And I'm going to turn this around, but it makes you respect what's important in life, and what's important in life is your family, is your friends, is who you make your family. That's so important in life. And these 204 people went to work one day. Some of them were the 4 shift, some of them were the back shift. So the morning and the evening shift, they all went in, went back, and only 3 of them made it out alive. That is heartbreaking. And I know this was many years ago, but I just want to bring it all home to everyone. Find some time in your heart to look out for your family, to have the time of day, to, if you're going to work, tell each other you love each other, because they might not come back. And every moment is important in life. And these people went to work and never came home. 204 people, and they were all buried in this cemetery. I will find the pictures, but the hill on the cemetery, and I'll turn this around again, the hill on this cemetery, it's just here. So this is on a hill. All of the graves, I mean, the Duke of Northumberland actually gave extra area to here so that everybody could be buried. This cemetery wasn't as big, but it got made big because this disaster. And this was one of the biggest disasters, mining disasters in England. It's not just in the northeast. And I know a lot of the mines are in the northeast, but it wasn't just in the northeast. It was all over. So a bit of a short live tonight. No investigation, just a short live of a little story that I thought might hit home with you all. A local story and something that I think everyone should be aware of. If you live locally, come and visit Hester Pit Memorial Garden, that is in New Hartley, or come visit the Memorial Obelisk, and that is in Earsdon, St Albans Cemetery. You can walk in and see it. There's also Commonwealth war graves, and you can even pick out and see the people who have been buried here. I will dig out some of the old pictures as well, but I just wanted you to see that. I hope you have a lovely Saturday night, and I hope you've all been enjoying the sun as well. I'm gonna go now, but I hope you have a lovely day, and good night, guys.